the early literacy piece. This is another way of positioning the importance of what you do from an economic standpoint. Partnership for America's Success. You can see who they are. They're not librarians. They're Fortune 500 and other leading men and women, corporate leadership level. Mobilizing business leaders to improve tomorrow's economy through smart policy investments in young children today. That report, Parenting Education is Economic Development, available online. And they talk about high-quality preschool. And many of you, I know, are involved in supporting preschool programs, either in terms of making materials available to child care centers or having resource learning centers for parents to bring their kids in. This report came out, talked about economic disparity and the impact on children falling behind right from the get-go. They said in households with children upper income and above, 13 books per child. Children in economically depressed areas, one book for 300 children. If you tie that back to how few Americans we are, how undereducated we are relative to much of the rest of the world, you can begin to piece together for that hard-nosed legislator who could care less about those people. You can start making the case that those people are Americans. Those people are part of our workforce. We can pay for them now in terms of investments in libraries and other early education pieces. Or we can pay for them later in terms of prison costs, in terms of unemployment rates, all the social costs. And there are reports that will put that into a number for you. And I absolutely agree with what Jamie had to say, is that in many cases, throwing numbers at people don't matter. I think that's particularly true when you throw in numbers of book circulation and all that. But for some of the hard-nosed, those people on the right wing of the political spectrum, they'll start relating, if you can translate investments in libraries and early education to what North Carolina is now putting into prison costs on an annual basis. What we're paying in terms of the state share of Social Security. Not Social Security, early Social Security, some other sorts of things. Translate it, put the right mix of messages together, realize that son of a gun can care less about people. If I can't put this in a numerical and economic impact thing for him, I'll never convince him. One of the ways of doing that. So we come up to the last part. Talked about the messages, the general message, how you frame your library. We've gone through some of the segment messages here, and I'll put some others in that handout that was available at the start. That's not all the messages, but that's some of them. Then I would say again, think of your own community. Think of 10 to 25 people that you would love to have part of your advocacy group who either now aren't concerned, don't care, I guess that's basically the same, opposed to you, think that in economic times you're less relevant. Who falls in that category? Don't put your friends here. Your friends are already on board. And they're going to break out in some combination of this. It may not be the same mix. But who are those people who need to become advocates for you? Who are the people that you would love to take your place on legislative day? Or in some cases, they're the targets of legislative day. Then it becomes a matter of spending some intellectual capital and having meetings with your friends. Who knows this guy? Maybe you go to church with him. Maybe you drink beer with him. Maybe she is in your Kiwanis club. Tell me, what are those person's primary interests? Would a military argument, would an economic argument, what's the best argument or combination of arguments that we can put together to convince this person? And go to them. Try to make the case before legislative day. Legislative day, they expect you to come in and sell a package. How about coming up with a list of people? It's not a particularly good time to do it now because there's not much time between now and is February the legislative day for 2012? Is that date been set, Carol?
I don't think that they've set it yet.
Okay. Again, a short session next year, yeah, whatever. So it may be tough to do it this next legislative cycle, but the idea is that these people are at least preliminarily pre-sold or warmed up before you go in on a legislative day. Somebody has called upon them in Raleigh during the regular term, or somebody's met with them when they've come home. Somebody important, somebody who makes a difference, somebody who has credibility in a way that you as librarians will never have. So what are the hot buttons? Maybe the hot button is simply, you're a new grandfather. Do you have any idea how tough your granddaughter's competition is going to be? Do you have any idea what value the library brings to that table, what the library can do that the Google machine cannot? Do you have any idea? Develop those messages which correspond to the hot buttons. And then we'll talk about in just a minute who's the right conveyor of the message. Typically what's happened is there's been a common message. It's a general message. We bring value. We're important. We're important to the community. We do a lot of good stuff. Sometimes it's gotten more specific than that, sometimes it's not. And the messenger has typically been library directors or friends of the library. It's a losing equation, and we've lost. The people who win go back to that markets of one, recognize that these folks are different. You take different messages with different messengers to each of them. Or in this case, this is not quite that sophisticated. They've clustered. They say, okay, we're going to have a message for elected officials. We're going to have a message for the business community. We're going to have a different message for parents. But the best strategy is recognize that everyone is different. You're going to sell Michael something, you find out what makes Michael tick. Well, for one thing, he's got a 7-year-old son. I don't. My children are grown. They'll sell me a different way. Maybe there's an issue in Johnston County that is totally different from an issue in Wayne County. Different ways of looking at it. So spend some time in finding out. This is not easy work. This is not pretty work. This is taking a lot of information and distilling the knowledge down here. But again, that's what you do. There's a better definition of library than cutting through tons of information and translating it down to knowledge. So you develop the knowledge here. Here's what's important to it. Here's that mix of library messages that works best. And it's always going to start with that framing thing that Jamie talked about. What's the big message? Whether it's those 4 bullets or some variation of it. And then it's sub-factored down to other sorts of things. And then we come to this, messengers. I've seen a lot of great messages destroyed by the wrong messenger. Suppose David Gregory on Sunday morning, next Sunday morning, had 2 guests on. These 2 people. Oops, there's a bad problem with that slide. Anybody see it? Pelosi on the right, Boehner on the left? I don't think so. There we go. No. Had these 2 people on. Ask the same question. How effective has the Obama administration and the Democratic members of Congress been this year? Would either of those individuals utter a single syllable that would catch anybody by surprise? Not one. The best they can do is arouse the passion in their flock already on board. Now, let's say that this, let's say, well, that's Greg. Meet him. And let's say that that's Carol. Not suggesting those are the political persuasions of those 2 individuals. But now you have these, you have the library director of Sand Hills and the library director of Shepherd coming to a negative or neutral legislator and saying, libraries are important. Do you think that legislator expects to hear anything unexpected? So the only way, as good as they are, and they're great, that Greg or Carol can be effective is having an unexpected message or not being there in the first place and having somebody convey the library story for them. Simple as that. Here is the single best tailored messenger I have ever seen for the library. Some of you have them on your web. You know who that? Everybody's seen that guy? Everybody seen the video? I'm going to tell you how great I think Beaufoy is. I bought his damn CDs. I'll run to one of them. It's great music. Pam and I were talking beforehand. If I was an older generation there, Pam, I would say, what, of the 12 cuts on there, there are probably 8 that appeal to us. Yeah. But it's not as, if you see the video, there's one. This guy's personality jumps off the screen. My wife accused me of having a man crush on him. Maybe, but in any case, there's just one place on there where he's walking around the library, and he's talking about all the things you can do at the library. You know, there's high-speed internet, there's places to meet, and there's all sorts of things. And then he stops him and he says, "Oh yeah, books." I mean, it's a really great message. And he is an enthusiastic speaker, and for the people the library is trying to reach. Pam, tell the story of Wilmington and some of the other things that have happened in the last couple of weeks or so with him. Pam, can you talk up just a little bit, please, ma'am?
He's been working with the state library every year to do a campaign to help us spread the word about the last card you can sign up. And usually we do it for the month of September. He is so energetic and enthusiastic. He goes, "Well, let's just do it all year." I'm like, so, and our target audience has been the teens, just because you can see by the teenage rock star, usually a rock star. So we've been visiting public libraries and schools and everything. Monday and Tuesday we were in Wilmington and we visited 9 different public schools. We saw over 2,411 kids in 2 days. And he so connects with those kids because he goes up there and he talks about his life and what he's done and how important the library is. And when he starts with baseball. You know, he has his radio too. He doesn't look as rock star as that. But as he talks, then he goes on and they're all, you know, "Are you really a rock star?" He tells them what he's been, what he's done. Then he whips his head off and he shakes his hair out. And he starts doing this rock thing, you know, like, you know, and several kids have said, "Oh, it's so cool to hear somebody that's a real rock star talk about it." It makes it, you know, easy to contact her. And, you know, the young girls are just like, it's nice because we haven't got this audio before. And
That's the expression. That's the expression that my wife says I have on my face. That's all right.
we've already seen increases too. People have told us that they've seen increases in people applying for our retirement and our retirement. And some of the, one of the things that are really great is the schools are starting to work more with libraries because of it. And so when we do a program in a school, the library may come and talk about their program and vice versa. So we're going to do it. And he's doing it all on his own. We're not paying him.
He's just really a great guy. But there is a segmented audience, in this case age-wise. There is a role model, maybe not, yeah. You know, now obviously he represents just one music genre. It's not rap, it's not R&B, probably doesn't appeal to all the audiences, but he is a great spokesperson. You think those kids would respond if you had Beverly Perdue? Nothing against the governor. Let's say if you had the governor on there saying libraries are important, they're going to listen. If they had Greg Needham on there, you think they're going to listen? Had me on there? But Beaufoy? Yeah, we'll listen. So the idea is determine your market segments. Then who are the Beaufoys that correspond to those? In some cases, again, with the you talked about base closings or with the military audience, we have military, senior retired military people. We have law enforcement people in this state who will talk about the importance of an education and the library's role in it in reducing crime or preparing men and women for military service. You know what percent? See if it even comes close. Military group called Mission Readiness came out with a report last year entitled "Ready, Willing, and Unable to Serve." What percent of Americans between the ages of 17 and 24 do you think qualify for military service? How much?
25.
Did you read the report?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the number, 25.
Surprised I remember.
No, in some cases it's physical disability, in some cases they just don't have the knowledge, they didn't graduate from high school. But the idea is, and again, you know, I'm basically an independent voter, don't have much use for either party right now. I'm not a Tea Partier, not that anybody gives a damn one way or the other. But there is a difference between the people that can speak effectively for Republicans who were elected last November and the Democrats who have traditionally held power. A military audience, a law enforcement audience, speaks to Republicans. They can convey a message. Business audience a business spokesman tends to lean Republican, not always. But what's the makeup of the target? We get the right messages, but if we don't get the right messenger, we're doomed. Can you imagine how Bo would play on the halls of the General Assembly? So we go back to this, where that was a ALA report, but it had its credibility bestowed upon it by a non-library source. Then we had the lifelong learning argument, always been there for libraries. This report came out, again, it's a great report. Prejudice in terms of convincing a neutral audience because it comes out by a group that promotes museums and libraries. But this is a good sell. In the report, there's a comparison between the job market and the job skills required for the time that we grew up and the ones that our kids are going into. Besides the U.S. Department of Labor, I don't know about the rest of the people in the room, but I fall in this category, number of jobs I've had in my lifetime. Going forward, that's what the U.S. Department of Labor says. And there's other differences. You know, we talked about this one. Job competition used to be local, now it's global. Education used to be institution-centered. Increasingly now, it's learner-centered, i.e. libraries and organizations like libraries. You take that information and you use the original source, U.S. Department of Labor. This is 8,000 different sources. This is the U.S. Department of Commerce. There's also the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Take some of that information and attribute it to the original source, not a secondary source. And then this I'm going to close because Alice is in the room. One of the libraries I worked with last year on strategic initiative was Southern Pines. I would like to take credit for the following story, but I can't. Lynn Thompson, the library director there, Alice, and a couple of other colleagues came up with this approach. Not because this report came out, but ICMA, which is the International City County Management Association, new report, maximize the potential of your public library. I just want you to read that. Keep in mind, the authors of this report, the author is an association of those people that many of you in the room report to, the city manager, the county manager. That's the author of the report. The report is basically saying what you've done traditionally is important, but there's more that we should be asking you to do. The people you work for are saying this. Now here's where the beauty of Alice and Lynn Thompson, the other people at Southern Pines, all staff people, consultant was of no help in this regard whatsoever. I just got out of the way and let it happen. They realized, or they understood, that they are a town department. The library director reports to the city council, town council. The town had just finished a comprehensive long-range plan. It had a series of priorities in it for the town. Most library strategic initiatives organize around traditional clusters like technology, collections, customer service, programs, et cetera, or they'll do it around age groups. You know, here's what we do for B through kindergarten, K through 6 through retirees, et cetera, et cetera. But Southern Pine said, we're a town department. We ought to be responding to the town's priorities. So they took what the town had identified as the priorities and said in those, these are the areas where the library has a role. So they started off with, for example, here was one of the areas, jobs and economic development. This was in the Southern Pines town plan. This is obviously just a summary of it, but this is what the town itself defined as the important stuff. What we did in the strategic planning process was first take a look at what was in the what was in the town, what was in the library's current strategic initiatives that pertain to economic development. What the strategic initiatives say this year in terms of what the library's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats were as it came to economic development. And on the basis of responding to this, what the library had been doing, what the members of the strategic planning committee wanted to do, the library then developed its own strategic plan, feeding directly into what the town had defined. I have never seen a better example of a library aligning itself with a broader vision. Really good stuff. And it drove home the point of the International City County Management Association. There's not a library in the room that does not have several, maybe more than several of this guy's books in here. Everybody familiar with Peter Drucker? Okay. Father of modern management. From a standpoint, until I was on the program with Jamie today, appearing on a program about 8 years ago with Peter Drucker was the professional highlight of my life. Next to my dad, biggest hero. Talked about management in corporate world, in nonprofit world, even in the religious environment. Author of many books. But everything that he had to say, all the wisdom that he would say, nothing is more relevant to library situations today than this. The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence. It is to act with yesterday's logic. Too many people see you through yesterday's eyes. In part, that's their problem, but it's primarily our problem. It suggests a weakness in advocacy. Not all these people are too stupid to grasp the facts that they're presented to them. It's a question of marketing. And when you come to marketing, the critical importance of what you do, we'll go back to the first word that showed up on the screen a little while ago. Relevance. You need to overcome the perception that your relevance is in decline. It's not. You've got great stories to tell. I yield to our friend from Colorado. Develop them. Make them compelling. I'm not sure I would exaggerate them as much as Jamie would, but whatever it takes. You've got to capture their attention. I was asked by, to devote to just 2 more slides and I will shut up. I was asked by the break and by 2 people, why have we let American education decline? And has it really declined? So I put a couple slides from another presentation. I just go through this quickly, the background material. How many people in the room were alive in 1957? Some of us. Most of you probably, we weren't old enough to quite remember this event. But back in, after World War II, America seemed to be clicking on all cylinders. We were number 1 in everything. And then we woke up one October morning in 1957 to this headline and found out that those brave but alleged stupid Soviets had beat us into space with Sputnik. And all of a sudden, everybody, including ourselves, started questioning whether the American way was really the best way. We went hard to work, but it was 4 years later that the Soviets again beat us by putting the first person into orbit. It was not John Glenn or Alan Shepard, it was Uri Gagarin of Ukraine. And the question was more than just American pride, because if the Soviets could do this, they also had the capacity to launch an ICBM missile into the mainland United States. So it was pride, it was also national security, military involved. American answer was eventually, we went to answer this. More than 200,000 Americans went to work for about 15,000 different companies. It took us a while, but the American answer was finally delivered in 1969. When that Apollo 11 Saturn V complex launched, three-stage rocket. Payload, two Americans safely to the surface of the moon, 3 Americans back home. Now think of the areas in which you're involved as an analogy to that launch. Early education. The payload here is an American workforce competitive on a global basis. Important that each stage be done correctly. Many of you are so involved here with early education. When launches fail, there's a great cost. You will, everybody in the room, remember when Challenger exploded? 73 seconds after launch. Loss of 7 American lives, space program that came to a halt. Got back on his feet. But it was 13 years later, we lost another craft returning on entry. Didn't appear to be a launch problem, but it was. What happened here was a piece of foam fell off at launch, cracked the wing, and although nobody knew there was a problem, when they re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, heat broke through the shuttle, destroyed it. Launch problem in both cases. When education systems fail, there are also consequences. They look like this: unemployment, high rates of poverty, high rates of incarceration, societal costs for all of us, and an American trajectory that in slope is not that different from this. Define the library's role in each stage. And let people know America greatness was rooted in its knowledge infrastructure. Our educational system used to be so far above everybody else's. You're a part of that educational system. The question was asked to me, well, how do we let this happen? Here's my answer. We had no Sputnik moment. There was no Pearl Harbor. No 9/11. Simply an erosion of the American position in terms of knowledge, gradually over the years. But if that's left unattended, erosion generally, or eventually, looks like this. They're wide chasms that are produced. The way to win the battle, the hearts and minds and the pocketbooks of those we're trying to reach, is to make the point that when it comes to quality public libraries, it doesn't matter who you are. You got a stake in this. In fact, those stakes are greater than you can imagine. So, up to you to define the poker pieces. You can apply them appropriately. And that is only done when you recognize markets, messages, and messengers are all important part of the equation. And you got to make a right connection between them. Be glad to answer any questions. What we want to do is break up into smaller groups. Let's say join 2 tables together. And see on the basis primarily of the wisdom that Jamie bestowed earlier today. What would you like to say about the libraries in North Carolina? 2 ways. What are the important messages? First, in terms of that general framing statement, the four points that are on the BHAC thing. Can we just take those and apply them verbatim to North Carolina? Some people might think that's plagiarism, but you know the difference between plagiarism and research, don't you? Attribution. That's great. Plagiarism, you steal from many, or from one. Well, that was a good story in there, but I blew it. Plagiarism, you steal from one. Research, you steal from many. So I don't think Jamie would mind plagiarism on that point.
I stole it all.
He stole it himself, so there we go. I am the original, I think I authored that original.
Yeah.
I think I did. But what do you want to say? What should be the position? What's the framing statement for the importance of North Carolina libraries? And then what would you say to a disgruntled legislator or a disgruntled member of city council who just don't think you're worth the investment? What message would you like to convey to him? And to the other point that was raised this morning, identify the person in your community who's the right person to convey that message. So if we'll take these two tables, then on back around, do that, spend about 20 minutes on that, and then we'll reconvene and see what you come up with.
It's good stuff.